Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, joining us this week to give us a briefing on the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Type your question, and we will do our best to answer them. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. We're going to start with Ramadan, as the title of this week's webinar stated. As we know, this earlier in the week, Monday, was the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and we know that that's a time not only, it also seems to be a time where terrorism certainly takes an uptick, certainly here in Israel, and there was a big concern that, especially with what's going on in Gaza, it could certainly inflame the situation here. There has been a working theory amongst the top military and even political echelons that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, wasn't interested in a hostage deal specifically because he felt the Ramadan would be a good time, not for a ceasefire, as many would hope, certainly in Qatar, Egypt, America, and even Israel, but actually a time where emotions are or tensions are high, and he can use it to exploit the religious fervor during this week and hope that what's going on in Gaza and elsewhere can spill over into other areas, into East Jerusalem, which is something that's been mentioned by Hamas leaders and other terrorist organizational leaders, in the hope that East Jerusalem Arabs and Arabs even within Israel can start some sort of intifada or just an uptick in violence. We have seen after the first couple of days, usually there's a feeling the first day or so are usually relatively quiet. But we have seen a few terror attacks, one today specifically at a checkpoint just outside Jerusalem where two people were stabbed by a 15-year-old who was then shot. But on the whole, it has to be said, especially the first couple of nights, it seems to be relatively calm, usually a good indicator of the tensions or calm of what's going on within East Jerusalem, especially around the Temple Mount, is usually Damascus Gate. Damascus Gate, for those who don't know, is one of the gates to the old city, and it's the one predominantly and the largest going into the Muslim quarter. It's one that most Palestinians in East Jerusalem use to go up to the Temple Mount, and it has been the scene of fighting, it has been the scene of tensions in the past, but so far there hasn't been much. Apparently, according to the news who have been following the situation, there hasn't necessarily been a festive feeling, and they interviewed a lot of East Jerusalem Palestinians who said that, how can we celebrate when we see what's going on in Gaza? But it also hasn't been a tense area as we've seen in previous years. So we'll see, there's still most of the month to go. There are still the concerns. But at the moment, things are starting relatively calmly, especially in Jerusalem and around the Temple Mount. I think there was something like 65,000 worshippers who ascended the Temple Mount to the mosques to pray the important Ramadan prayers, and they went off without a hitch. So let's hope that that continues. On the hostage talks themselves, while they seem to have gone a little bit quiet since the beginning of Ramadan, because there was this hope that that will be the cutoff date for cessation of hostage talks and some sort of pause or temporary ceasefire with some hostages released. That didn't happen, which certainly spread a lot of pessimism around Israel and around those involved with the hostage talks. But Qatar put out something in the last day that said that talks are ongoing. There are those that feel that Qatar have an interest in the talks coming to fruition, and there is supposedly significant pressure being put on Qatar to then place on Hamas to be a bit more flexible. Qatar is certainly trying to be as optimistic as possible, but at the moment, no one in Israel is getting their hopes up about that. Another major event that happened this week, obviously, is the State of the Union address, President Biden giving his last State of the Union address before the elections. And as one can imagine, Israel and the conflict with Hamas, I wouldn't say it took center stage, but certainly it was a significant part of the speech. On the one hand, President Biden did invite families of the hostages to be in the chamber while the State of the Union address was given. On the other hand, there was certainly an uptick in pressure being placed on Israel. It was followed by, I should say, first of all, the big surprise in that speech was the idea of creating a pier from Gaza where humanitarian aid could then be shipped in from Cyprus, and that operation is, beginning. So we'll have to see exactly what happens there. There's been a lot of scorn thrown on this idea of an American-built pier off Gaza. It's certainly not going to be built tomorrow or next week, so remains to be seen exactly what's going to happen there. There was a new land entry into Gaza, the military road that Israel built. There was a sort of a test run of that today, which succeeded, but we'll have to see exactly how that happens. Morocco took a whole new route. We actually flew in humanitarian aid to Ben Gurion Airport, obviously with the acquiescence of Israel, and this was then transported into Gaza. It was considered a gesture by the Israeli government for Ramadan, but it shows that the contacts between Israel and Morocco are ongoing, despite some of the rhetoric coming out of the kingdom, and just goes to show that some of the more moderate and pragmatic nations that Israel already has relations with, the relationship is ongoing. There's a need for these relations, so at least that's extremely positive. Going back to President Biden, he followed up his speech in Congress with an interview he gave where there was this sort of throwing out of maybe he'll go and speak in the Knesset. Obviously, there's a bit of symmetry there because if we remember a number of years ago, under President Obama, Prime Minister Netanyahu was invited, not by the president, I think it was by the speaker, if I'm not much mistaken, to address Congress. And that was very much against the wishes of President Obama, the administration at the time. And the Obama administration and many of those those figures who are around in the Biden administration certainly haven't forgiven, and many in the Democratic Party haven't forgiven Netanyahu. What they saw was, basically trying to hijack the relations and go against protocol. And there was this sense or this hint or even outward saying that President Biden would come to the Knesset to speak directly to the Israeli people. Now, there's a couple of things in there which need to be understood. First of all, as opposed to what happened at the time of the Congress, the Israeli Knesset is under the authority of the government, the coalition, and the Speaker of the House, who would have the authority to, official authority, I should say, to invite someone to address it, is Amir Ohana, who's very much a part of the Likud, but also very much a Netanyahu loyalist. So protocol, not only protocol, but bureaucratically and officially, it's unclear exactly how that would work. Second of all, again, there is this understanding or this feeling or whatever it is, a narrative that many in the Biden administration feel that they can try and create a wedge between the government and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, who they're finding less and less in common with, let's put it mildly, over the weeks, and the Israeli people. And we saw that again in many of the comments that came out from the Biden administration and others trying to differentiate between the Israeli government and the Israeli people. We heard Kamala Harris use this terminology also in a speech in the previous week. And it's something very much on the mind of senior figures, let's say, in the Biden administration. Interestingly, again, not coincidental, there was a leak of an intelligence report which stated that there is a belief that Netanyahu is on his last legs. and he can be replaced with a more moderate government. There is a big sense, and it's certainly my feeling, that there's a misunderstanding of the Israeli public's attitude. While certainly there's no doubt about it, poll after poll show that Netanyahu is dipping in favorability, although he seemed to stabilize a little bit this week and maybe even gain a seat. But, you know, a foreign leader who attacks the democratically elected leader of a country at war, usually the battens are hatched and basically they're circling the wagons, etc., etc. And I'm not sure that that would really necessarily be a successful ploy, even though it is something very much believed within the Biden administration, that they can try and drive a wedge between the government and the people and weaken Netanyahu further. What we did see in response is a quote unquote, a very senior Israeli official reacting to that. And usually when a very senior Israeli official, it's either Netanyahu or someone very close to Netanyahu himself, who makes the statement and basically says, instead of trying to defeat or topple Hamas, the US administration seems to want to topple Bibi. And that's almost certainly from, as I said, from the prime minister or someone very close to him, really trying to react. Obviously, they can't go on record with their feelings. One can understand the diplomatic sensitivity, but it's clear that some of these attempts by the Biden administration, I should say, have been taken very negatively. On the domestic side, today the budget for 2024, the war budget, an amended budget. If we remember that they did pass a 2024 budget, but now they needed to look at it again and move the numbers around and create a much larger budget because of war considerations, not just military, obviously, but social, economic, etc. It was passed. It passed relatively easily. There was obviously a lot of clamor from the opposition, but and even from the coalition last minute deals. Some people, Avi Dichter, the agriculture minister, felt that his budget was being cut too much, and so there was some last minute negotiations and some resolution was found to that, but the budget passed, which means that Netanyahu has officially at least quiet until the end of March 2025, because as we know, for elections to be, if a budget isn't able to be passed 3 months after it's supposed to be, which, as I said, the 2024 ends on December 31st, and then you need another 3 months. If a budget is then not passed 3 months after that, then we go to automatic elections. So we're basically talking about a year of, sort of, I wouldn't say taking elections off the table, because there are other avenues, but certainly it takes a major strain off the government, and it gives it takes away an obvious path to national elections. With that in mind, there was also another very interesting political maneuver in the last in 24 hours, where Gideon Saar, who used to be in the Likud, used to be a very senior person in the Likud and in the government, who, as we know, fell out with Netanyahu and left the Likud to create his new party, New Hope, which then joined. That's his 4 seats joined with Benny Gantz's blue and 8 seats, blue and white, to create a National Unity Party, which have 12 seats in the current Knesset, and as we know, they joined a National Unity government. Well, Saar sprang a surprise on, I would say, most of the Israeli public by saying that particular partnership with Gantz is over, and he will be removing his 4 seats from the National Unity Party. So the question is, why now, and what does this mean? Well, one of his stated, declarations was he would like a seat at the War Cabinet. I would argue, speaking to some people in the Likud, it could be that was very much manufactured, at least if not with Netanyahu himself, certainly with some people around Netanyahu. It remains to be seen whether he'll get that. At the moment, Benny Gantz, his former partner, after wishing him good luck, is the one who is stopping him from joining the War Cabinet. He gave a speech today in the Knesset with the words in English, "If it ain't broke, no, don't fix it. In other words, I'm happy with the makeup of the war cabinet as it is. Another stumbling block for the current government, if it wanted to bring in Gideon Sa'ar to the war cabinet, is Itamar Ben-Gvir, on hearing Sa'ar's demand, said, well, if he's in, I'm in. And if you bring Sa'ar in, then you have the headache of saying no to Ben-Gvir, and perhaps even Smotrich after that, because why should Ben-Gvir come in and not Smotrich? So Bibi has a bit of a problem there, even if he does want to bring in Gideon Sa'ar. At the moment, the people around Bibi seem to be a little bit split on whether to bring Sa'ar in or not. Sa'ar wants to create an alternative to the Likud at this point, what he calls a more responsible right wing. He sees a gap, perhaps, that could be filled by people who are put off by the Likud. Interestingly, an immediate poll was done tonight, and according to the poll, Sa'ar pretty much gets 4 to 5 seats, which he currently has. Doesn't really take too much off. He takes a couple of seats, or 3 seats, I think, of the National Unity Party, and only 1 seat off the Likud. So again, the early signs are the gambit won't be incredibly successful. But if he joins with the likes of Bennett and Yossi Cohen, perhaps it could be a little bit more. Finally, there was quite another big surprise which led the news. Brigadier General Dan Goldfuss, who's a very senior officer in the Israeli army, who was giving a situational report on the fighting in Gaza for the media, went a little bit off topic at the end. After giving the prepared remarks, he suddenly turned to another notebook, and apparently, unbeknownst to the IDF senior brass, decided to give it a bit of a political speech where he talked about how everyone has to take responsibility for October 7th. The army's taking responsibility. It will learn the lessons. It's continuing to learn the lessons, but it's time for the political level to also learn the lessons. Talked about accountability, unity, and we need leadership worthy of us. Now this, and one can imagine, usually IDF generals do not go off script. They do not make political remarks. The IDF chief of staff is already apparently calling Goldfuss in for a clarification stroke dressing down. But the fact that he's making these comments is significant. It shows that there is disappointment in the senior brass of the IDF with the political class, and in the middle of a war to come out with such, I would say, even brazen, certainly brave remarks. And he's being applauded by many people, not necessarily as one can imagine within the coalition, but certainly creating or giving fuel to a conversation that the political class has still not quite understood the reality of October 7th and its responsibility and accountability for it. So that certainly is going to create waves, and we'll see exactly how that ends in the days and weeks ahead. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, well, thank you, Ashley. We've quite a few questions here already. The first one I'd like to ask comes from David Levine, and going back to Ramadan right now, he asks, with all of the violence associated with Ramadan that is ongoing, why did the Israeli government approve Muslim access to the Temple Mount at this time?
Well, it's a balancing act. On the one hand, every year has to think about this very carefully. There are those who want to restrict, those like Itamar Ben-Gvir, and those who want completely free access, and that's usually the position of the international community and the more, let's say, quote unquote, moderate elements of the government and the decision-making process. Basically, they want to try and give as much access as possible, and the decision was made in the end, until there's any violence. And really, sometimes the measures that are taken to prevent violence actually create even more violence. So it's a very difficult decision. But this year, as in pretty much every other year, and I would say even more so with what's going on in Gaza, there was a decision that we're not going to give Sinwar a win here by showing Israeli soldiers and policemen, pushing back and, crowd control and everything else we've seen in some other moments during the year and previous years. That's probably what Sinwar wants. So there was a feeling that we'll try and calm things as much as possible in the hope that the other side will reciprocate. So far it is, but again, something can happen and it can all go off. So, it remains to be seen whether that's a successful idea or just, will be a failure. But at the moment, things seem to be relatively calm.
So to follow up on that, not with regards to the Muslims in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, but in the rest of proper Israel, and maybe you might not be able to answer this question, but what is the general attitude and what is the general feeling of the Muslim citizens in Israel? Is there maybe any reason to be concerned about them going towards radical elements of Islamism during Ramadan with the ongoing war?
Again, we haven't really seen anything too much. Those are the early signs. So far, even since October 7th, or at least since Israel, started the war against Hamas to defeat Hamas, there's been this big question mark over the Israeli Arab public, whether it will join in, whether we'll see some of the scenes we saw in the last operation. I can't remember exactly when it was, where we saw mass riots, violent demonstrations in mixed cities, in Lod, in Ramla, in Haifa, where there was quite a few deaths, bloodshed, fear, and attacks between the communities. And so far, we haven't seen it, partly because there's a heightened police presence in some of these areas. Also, it does seem at this point, and again, it's something could change it tomorrow, but it doesn't seem like Israeli Arabs have any great interest in getting involved at this point, even though they may show great solidarity with their brethren in Gaza and elsewhere.
All right, well, thank you. The next question we have comes from Eric Selkov. He asks, how can you explain the delay of Israel going into Rafah?
There are many factors. First of all, there's tremendous pressure. I don't think Israel has faced any sort of pressure like this in any operation in the past, not even during this war. There's a lot of talk about the red line. Did President Biden put a red line on Rafah? Is it with a caveat that if Israel deals with the humanitarian situation, then it's okay? The President Biden did mention a red line. It's not clear exactly what he meant by a red line, and then had to be walked back a little bit by some of his spokespeople. There hasn't been any official sort of readout that Israel can't go to Rafah, as opposed to some European and other countries which have said to them, Rafah is a red line and Israel hasn't, should not go into Rafah. Defense Minister Gallant said today that we will go into Rafah, and it's going to happen very soon. There is a question mark within the army. Why have we waited so long? It's probably to do with that. Does the Israeli government have a plan to deal with the 1.2 million internally displaced Gazans that have now been forced into Rafah? Can they move them somewhere else? What will that mean for the aid? Israel certainly will have to present at least the US, if not other countries, a plan of how to deal with the civilians there before they go in. Israel, Netanyahu, Gallant, Gantz, everyone has said we have to go into Rafah, and the Israelis have made the case that those who say that we can't go into Rafah are basically saying that Israel cannot win, Israel cannot defeat Hamas, and obviously that's unacceptable from the official government, and I would say the majority of the Israeli stance on this issue. So there's probably some very difficult conversations going on. The Americans want to know exactly what's going to happen before they even, I'm not even saying green light it, but certainly will step back from the sort of hard red light at this point.
All right, well, thank you. So let's see. Yeah, okay. So we have a question coming in now from Julian R. Going back to American politics in Israel, Julian asks, American attempts to intervene in the work of the Israeli government is a violation of international norms. Why is the Israeli government or the prime minister not saying this directly to the Americans?
First of all, because, I mean, it's, I could say a lot about this subject. Is it new? Is it unprecedented? Has it happened before? One could point to, former President Clinton allowing his advisors to come and help former Prime Minister Ehud Barak. One could argue from the other side, Netanyahu getting involved in American politics, openly supporting Trump in the past. It's not necessarily new or unique. Nothing has been said openly and officially. There's no American official who'll go on record and say, we want Netanyahu out. All of this is leaks, it's off record, it's behind the scenes, it's unnamed officials. A lot of it is to put pressure. They certainly are not happy with Netanyahu, and there's been a lot of very serious talks, as Biden put it, come to Jesus talks, as he said on the hot mic, off record sort of comments that he made after the State of Union. I'm sure I know these conversations are happening, very tough talks, and there is a feeling in the US administration that they're not being listened to as much as they would like. I think the idea that they're not being listened to at all is absurd. And it would also be absurd for them to think that Israel should basically heed everything the Americans say. But, the Americans probably think that there should be more listening, especially with the aid that they're giving, with the defense that they're providing in international fora. So the Americans do not feel, especially, let's not forget, and I've said it before, everything needs to be seen through the prism of the fact that Americans are in an election year, and they feel that they're not being given the support that they would need. When Biden is being hit for his support of Israel amongst his progressive left, and especially at the moment, according to polls, Biden is flailing, and he needs a little bit of assistance with that. So some of these conversations are a little bit more vociferous, probably because of that, whereas they wouldn't be if it was an election year. That's the feeling. But certainly there's a lot of disappointment from Netanyahu and the people around him, and there is a feeling that, if not Biden himself, certainly many people around him are seeking to replace Netanyahu. Let's be honest, there wouldn't be too many people in the senior Biden administration who'd be shedding too many tears if Netanyahu were to go. But it's one of these games that countries play, and we're in unique circumstances. We're in election year. Israel is at war. Israel does have a relatively weakened and unpopular prime minister, so we are in a relatively unique situation at the moment.
Yeah, and the election in the States here plays a lot into this. There's recent statements from Anthony Blinken where on the one hand, it seems like he is supporting Israel in their mission against Hamas, but on the other hand, he also seems to keep mentioning this idea that the two-state solution is possible even while Hamas is still ruling over the Gaza. What do you make of those statements?
Well, again, I would just say the first thing I would say is, again, it needs to be seen through the prism of American elections. Secretary of State Blinken and others really want to try and give a positive slant to what's going on. You can imagine, well, you in the States will see this far more than I will here in Israel, the daily news of the Palestinians who are dying, ostensibly starvation, which again is yet to be proven, and we haven't really seen any actual proof of that. But this is what is being reported, and there's not enough aid, and especially during Ramadan and everything like that. And this is what Americans are seeing, and obviously that plays on the heartstrings of the left wing far more than the right wing, let's say. So they're trying to put a positive slant that perhaps something good can come out of this, perhaps some movement on the two states solution, 2 states for 2 people. So that's something that they're pushing. It's unrealistic. Everyone in the US administration knows that they can't hand the keys. To who? There's no one in the PA, certainly not Mahmoud Abbas. And even this talk of a reformed PA, there's no reform. There's been no movement. There is going to be a new prime minister of the Palestinian Authority in the coming days. It's going to be a bureaucrat. But again, the prime minister, as we've seen previously, has very little power. The power will be mostly vested within Mahmoud Abbas and his ruling elite. So it's a bit of a show, but still, the PA is inciting to violence. It's paying for the slaying of Israelis. It's basically, it's not a play. It's corrupt. It has less and less control by the day, even in the West Bank. So the idea that two-state solution is in the offing is absurd, and no one really believes that. But the fact that it's being pushed is just placing greater pressure. And there is a concern that a lot of Europeans are sort of trailing a little bit with this, from, with the guidance from America, that maybe a few of the, I don't want to use the word important nations, but some nations like the UK could recognize a Palestinian state, sort of unilaterally. And that would certainly be a big blow diplomatically to Israel. And perhaps maybe even there could be something at the UN that the Americans wouldn't veto in the Security Council. So there is a concern that there could be diplomatic actions, even if on the ground, there is really no possibility of a Palestinian state in the near future. But certainly some very difficult and challenging steps could be taken by the international community in that direction. And that's what the concern is over these remarks by Secretary Blinken and others on the two-state solution.
All right, thank you. I know we're just about at time here, but Eric Selkov asked this question some time ago. Maybe we can make this quick. He asks, he says, Netanyahu said that the war could end in 2 to 4 months after going into Rafah. Does anyone else agree with that assessment?
Well, I think it all depends how you describe war. Will it be more of a policing situation after 2 or 3 months, 3 or 4 months? Yeah, I mean, the war in its current form certainly could finish once they go into Rafah within a number of months, and then it's just a matter of whenever Hamas raises its head, or individuals or terrorists here and there, to take them out, to do limited or more limited operations, but certainly to finish off what they're doing at the moment, then go to Rafah certainly probably won't take more than a few months. Again, as it depends what sort of a green light or amber light that they receive from the international community, how fast they can do it. But on the ground, it wouldn't take more than a few months. And then they can move to something more akin to policing operations or more limited operations after that. So ostensibly, the war, in the sense that we see it today, could be, let's say, largely ended within a matter of months.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. We have unfortunately come to the end of our podcast. Thank you again for joining us and giving us that update.
Thank you.
All righty. And for our viewers, please be on the lookout for our upcoming email with our future podcast offerings for the next week. And before I sign off, we would also like to remind our viewers and listeners of the Middle East Forum's upcoming policy conference celebrating our 30-year anniversary. It'll be taking place from May 13th to May 15th in Washington, D.C., and it will feature policy panels covering Israel victory, confronting the threats from Turkey and Iran, countering Islamism, reforming Middle East studies on higher education campuses, and more. You can sign up on our website under the activities tab or send an email to events@meforum.org. We hope to see you all there. We thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.